I used to think I was unlucky. That was the easiest explanation. Some people just draw the short straw over and over again, right? Jobs didn't stick, managers turned cold, customers complained, and somehow I always seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. At first, it felt random. Then it felt cruel. And eventually, it felt personal in a way I couldn't explain. I'm 24 now, but this all started a few years ago, right after I finished my education. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't careless. If anything, I was desperate to prove myself. I took whatever work I could find: cafes, bookstores, libraries, tutoring gigs, grocery stores. Sometimes I worked 2 jobs at once. I told myself I was building experience, expanding my resume, learning how the real world worked. Most of the jobs followed the same pattern. The first few weeks would be fine. I'd learn the routines, get along with co-workers, maybe even feel like I was finally settling in. Then something strange would happen. A customer would complain about me, but the complaint wouldn't match anything I remembered doing. A review would appear online describing an employee who sounded suspiciously like me, accusing me of behavior I'd never engaged in. Once, a manager pulled me aside and asked why I'd accessed inappropriate websites using the staff Wi-Fi, something I absolutely had not done. I defended myself every time. Sometimes they believed me, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes it didn't matter. I'd be let go quietly, or my hours would be cut until quitting felt inevitable. The shortest job lasted less than 3 weeks. The longest didn't even make it to a year. Each time, I told myself it was just bad luck. Each time, I swallowed the humiliation and applied somewhere new. And every time, my girlfriend was there for me. Her name was Janice. She was 5 years older than me, confident in a way I admired, calm when I was anxious. We'd been together for over 2 years. She knew everything, every firing, every awkward meeting, every moment I came home feeling hollow and embarrassed. She held me while I spiraled. She reassured me that none of it defined me. She told me I was smart, capable, and unlucky in a way that would eventually pass. I believed her because I needed to. By the time I started working part-time at a small neighborhood bakery, I was already exhausted. Not physically, mentally. I'd learned to expect the worst even when things were going well. Still, the bakery felt different. The staff was small. The owner-manager seemed kind. I told myself this one would last. For over 2 months, nothing went wrong. Then one afternoon, my manager asked to speak with me in her office. She didn't look angry, just uncomfortable. She showed me a printed Google review. Someone had written a long, detailed complaint about an employee who was rude, inappropriate, and unprofessional. The description matched my shift almost perfectly. On that day, I'd been the only one working. I felt my stomach drop, but I didn't panic the way I used to. I explained, calmly, that this had happened before. That someone seemed to have it out for me. That the accusations didn't reflect my behavior at all. To my surprise, she believed me. She told me she'd dismissed the review and thanked me for being upfront. I went home shaken, but relieved. For once, nothing had exploded. I didn't tell Janice about it. That should have been my first real warning sign, the fact that I hesitated. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I was tired of sounding broken. I wanted one normal evening. We talked about dinner, about her day, about nothing important. Later that night, she left the room to shower. Her phone was on the table. It buzzed. I wasn't snooping. I swear that. The screen lit up, and I couldn't help but see it. A notification from Google. Something about a manager responding to a review. The username attached to the review response was unmistakable. It was the same strange name I'd seen earlier that day. My heart didn't race. It sank. Like something inside me had finally snapped into place. I didn't confront her. I didn't say anything at all. I told myself I was jumping to conclusions. That there had to be another explanation. That paranoia had been eating at me for too long, and I couldn't let it ruin the one stable thing I had left. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew heavier with every passing hour. 2 days later, I told her I needed to book a train ticket to visit my father. She offered to let me use her account. When she went to shower, I opened her email. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't not look. It didn't take long. There was an email she'd sent to herself. Attached was a spreadsheet. I opened it. I still remember the way my hands felt, cold and numb, like they didn't belong to me anymore. The spreadsheet contained my entire life. Every job I'd ever had. Every workplace email. Passwords. Shift schedules. Names and phone numbers of co-workers. Notes about which managers were easiest to contact. Fake accounts linked to complaint platforms. Email templates. Timelines. It wasn't chaos. It was organized. Efficient. Methodical. This hadn't been impulsive. It had been planned. I sent the file to myself. I took screenshots. I printed it out. I don't remember deciding to do those things, I just did them, like muscle memory taking over when your brain can't cope. When Janice left for work, I packed. I didn't take anything sentimental. Just essentials. Clothes. Documents. My laptop. I felt like I was being watched even though she wasn't there. Like the walls knew what I'd discovered. I called my boss and said I needed time off. I didn't explain. I didn't have the words. Then I went to my dad's. The moment I walked into his house, I broke. I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a child, deep, uncontrollable sobs that left me gasping. He didn't ask questions at first. He just let me fall apart. Over the next few days, he helped me piece together what to do. Police. A lawyer. A therapist. I slept on the couch because I couldn't stand the thought of being alone in a room with a door that locked. Janice tried to contact me. I didn't respond. Eventually, I sent one message. It was short. Final. I told her it was over. That I knew what she'd done. My father handled the rest. The legal process was slow and terrifying. Every email notification made my chest tighten. Every unfamiliar number felt like a threat. I changed every password, deleted accounts, locked down my digital footprint until it felt like I barely existed online at all. In the end, we didn't go to court. Some people think that means she won. It doesn't feel that way to me. I couldn't survive a public trial. I could barely survive knowing what she'd done. Watching her face consequences wouldn't have erased the damage, it would have stretched it out, kept me trapped in it longer. Instead, everything was settled privately. I moved. I found a stable job under tighter security. I stayed in therapy. Slowly, painfully, I learned how to trust my own reality again. It's been years now. I still get anxious when something goes wrong at work. I still keep my accounts private. I still flinch at unexpected emails. But I haven't had a panic attack in months. I sleep through most nights. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about me, if she knows this story exists out there somewhere. But it doesn't matter. What matters is this: I wasn't unlucky. I wasn't broken. I wasn't incompetent. I was being sabotaged by the person who told me she loved me. I woke up 2 days before my wedding feeling strangely calm. That surprised me. Everyone had warned me that the days leading up to it would be chaotic, full of nerves and last-minute disasters, but instead I felt steady, happy, like I had finally arrived at a point in my life where everything made sense. My fiancé was already up, making coffee in the kitchen, humming softly to himself. That sound alone grounded me. 3 years together, a little over 1 year engaged, and somehow he still felt like my safest place. We'd grown into each other naturally, without drama, without games. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. I checked my phone while still half asleep, expecting nothing more than a few group messages or maybe an email from the venue. Instead, I saw a wall of text from my best friend. The timestamp said 6:04 a.m. At first, I smiled. He and I had known each other since freshman year of college. Over a decade of friendship. Inside jokes no one else understood. Late night talks about everything and nothing. He was part of the furniture of my life, something constant and familiar. Seeing his name pop up felt normal. Then I started reading. The message was long. Too long. Paragraph after paragraph poured down my screen, each sentence heavier than the last. He wrote about timing, about fear, about how he'd never been brave enough. He wrote about watching me fall in love with someone else and hoping, stupidly, that it would somehow fall apart on its own. He wrote about loving me quietly, patiently, for years. Then came the part that made my stomach turn cold. He asked me to call off the wedding. He said it wasn't too late. He said we could leave, start over, finally be together the way we were meant to be. I stared at my phone, numb. My hands started shaking, not because I was conflicted, but because something sacred had just been ripped open without my consent. I didn't love him like that. I never had. What hurt the most wasn't the confession itself. It was the realization that our entire friendship had been built on something uneven. That while I'd been living honestly, he'd been waiting, watching, hoping for my life to fall apart so he could step in. I felt nauseous. I put the phone down and sat there in silence, listening to the coffee machine finish its cycle, listening to my fiancé move around the kitchen, completely unaware that my world had just tilted. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The next several hours passed in a blur. I went through the motions of the day, nodded when spoken to, smiled when expected. But inside, my thoughts spiraled. How long had he felt this way? Had every supportive word come with an agenda? Had every laugh, every shared memory, been filtered through hope that I'd someday choose him instead? The betrayal sat heavy in my chest. I was also angry. Deeply, quietly angry. Not because he had feelings happen, but because of the timing. 2 days before my wedding. 2 days before one of the most important moments of my life. He hadn't chosen honesty. He'd chosen chaos. By the time my fiancé came home that evening, I was emotionally exhausted. I told him we needed to talk. He could hear it in my voice immediately. He sat down across from me, concern etched into his face, and waited. I showed him the message. I watched his expression change as he read. Surprise first. Then disbelief. Then anger, not directed at me, but at the situation. At the audacity of it. I started apologizing instinctively, words tumbling out of me even though I hadn't done anything wrong. He stopped me gently. He told me I didn't owe him an apology, that I hadn't betrayed him, that this wasn't my fault. That moment alone reminded me why I was marrying him. We talked for a long time. I answered every question honestly, not because he demanded it, but because transparency felt necessary. I even showed him old messages between my friend and me, not because there was anything to hide, but because I wanted him to see the truth as clearly as I did. There had been no emotional affair, no crossed lines, no secret longing on my side. My fiancé admitted that he'd always suspected my friend had a crush on me, but that he believed it was harmless and respectful. Until now. Then he asked me what I wanted to do. That question mattered. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't claim ownership over the situation. He gave the choice back to me. I told him the truth. That as much as it hurt, I didn't want my friend at the wedding. I didn't trust that he wouldn't try to make the day about himself. I didn't trust that he could sit there and celebrate a marriage he'd just tried to sabotage. We wrote a response together. Short, clear, firm. I told my friend that he had misunderstood our relationship, that the wedding was still happening, and that it would be best if he didn't attend. I made sure the message came from me, not filtered through my fiancé, because I knew how narratives could twist if left unchecked. Then we waited. The hours between sending that message and receiving his reply were agonizing. I checked my phone obsessively. My fiancé asked if I wanted to block him immediately, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted closure. Part of me wanted to believe that after everything, he would respond with grace. He didn't. When the message finally came through, it was longer than the first. And crueler. He accused me of leading him on for over a decade. He said I had used him. Manipulated him. He said he hoped my fiancé would leave me. He said things I still struggle to repeat, wishes of infertility, of loneliness, of regret. It felt like reading words written by a stranger. I broke down completely. My fiancé took my phone and left the room. I don't know exactly what he said to my former friend. I didn't ask. All I know is that when he came back, the color had drained from his face, and he told me it was done. My friend was blocked. On everything. He wouldn't be coming to the wedding. Our best man and maid of honor were informed. They handled everything quietly, discreetly. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone else. I didn't have to relive it again and again. And then, somehow, the wedding day arrived. I expected to feel sadness, grief for the friendship I'd lost. But standing there, surrounded by people who loved us genuinely, something shifted. The absence didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Not after seeing who my friend really was when he didn't get what he wanted. The wedding was beautiful, joyful, light. I laughed. I danced. I cried the good kind of tears. If my former friend tried to show up, I never knew about it. If he watched from a distance, unseen, that was his burden to carry, not mine. Now, looking back from the other side of the honeymoon, I understand something I didn't before. Love doesn't wait in the shadows, hoping someone's happiness collapses. Love doesn't demand last-minute sacrifices or dramatic gestures. Love respects boundaries. Love speaks up before it turns into resentment. I didn't lose a best friend. I lost an illusion. And in return, I gained clarity, peace, and a marriage built on honesty instead of hidden expectations. Sometimes the hardest endings happen right before the happiest beginnings. And sometimes, letting go is the only way forward. I used to think birthdays were silly. Just another day on the calendar, another excuse to feel older. That was before I learned how much they can hurt when the people you love treat them like they don't matter. I turned 21 on a Sunday. That detail matters more than it should, because it meant there were no work excuses, no late shifts, no unavoidable obligations. Just a day that existed quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. My boyfriend and I had been together for almost 3 years. We met when we were young and figuring ourselves out, and in a lot of ways we grew up together. He lived with his mom. He'd dropped out of school. I was still studying, still trying to build something stable for myself. We talked often about moving in together someday, about the future, about how things would be better once everything settled. Birthdays mattered to me. He knew that. I'd told him more than once. Not in a demanding way, not with expectations of extravagance, just with honesty. I liked feeling remembered, chosen. I liked knowing that once a year, someone paused their world to acknowledge mine. For his birthdays, I always tried. I saved money. I baked cakes from scratch even when they came out a little uneven. I wrote cards that took me hours to finish because I wanted the words to be right. I didn't do it because I expected something in return. I did it because I loved him. The first year, he was great. Thoughtful. Present. It felt balanced. The second year, we celebrated my birthday late. He said he was tired from work. I told myself it was fine. People get tired. Life happens. I swallowed the disappointment and moved on. This year was different. I turned 21. That felt big to me. Not because of alcohol or legality or anything like that, but because it felt like a threshold. Like stepping into adulthood with intention. I bought a new dress weeks in advance, a soft pink one I'd been saving for, imagining how it would feel to wear it out to dinner, maybe take a photo together, something simple but meaningful. All week, I talked about my birthday. Casually. Lightly. My birthday's coming up. I can't believe I'll be 21. He nodded. Smiled. Acted like he heard me. Sunday afternoon, I texted him to confirm our plans. Nothing elaborate. Just checking in. That's when the tone shifted. He replied vaguely. Then defensively. Then dismissively. He told me he'd already made plans. He said he didn't think it was a big deal. He suggested we celebrate another day, like last year. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of it. I reminded him that it was my birthday. That I thought we were doing something together. He told me I was overreacting. That I should be grateful he was even willing to reschedule. The words stung more than I expected. I asked why he hadn't told me earlier. He said he forgot, even though I'd mentioned it all week. Then he went out. I stayed home. I changed into the dress anyway, even though there was nowhere to go. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, trying to convince myself I looked silly for caring this much. I told myself I was being dramatic, that I was too old to feel this hurt over a single day. But the silence was loud. I spent my 21st birthday alone in my room, scrolling through messages from friends who assumed I was out celebrating. I didn't correct them. I didn't want to explain. My boyfriend didn't text. The next day, he suggested we celebrate properly later. He said I owed him an apology for being ungrateful. Something in me cracked. It wasn't just about the birthday. It was about the pattern. About how my feelings always seemed negotiable, something to be postponed or minimized as long as it was convenient for him. About how effort flowed one way. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think, to feel without being told how to feel. When I finally did respond, it turned into a long conversation. Messages back and forth that spiraled into something ugly. He accused me of guilt-tripping him. I told him I felt invisible. He told me I was too sensitive. I told him I felt taken for granted. He apologized, but the apology felt hollow, like something he'd learned to say without changing anything. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying our entire relationship in my head. The good moments, the laughter, the comfort, and then the moments where I'd shrunk myself to keep the peace. I realized something terrifying. If this was how he treated something he knew mattered to me, how would he treat bigger things later on? The next evening, I told him I needed to talk. I'd rehearsed the conversation in my head a dozen times. I thought it would break me. It didn't. I told him I couldn't keep doing this, that I needed a partner who showed up without being reminded, who didn't treat my needs like inconveniences, who didn't make me feel guilty for wanting to be celebrated. He was shocked, angry, then sad, then desperate. He sent messages I didn't have the energy to answer. Long paragraphs about how he loved me, how he'd change, how he couldn't imagine life without me. Reading them hurt, but they didn't move me the way they once would have. Because love shouldn't require begging for effort. We broke up. I cried for days afterward, not because I doubted the decision, but because letting go of someone you planned a future with always hurts, even when it's necessary. Looking back now, I don't think he was a bad person. I think he was immature, comfortable, unwilling to grow at the same pace I was growing. My 21st birthday didn't look the way I imagined. There was no dinner, no photos, no candlelit moment. But it gave me something else. Clarity. Sometimes the most important gift you receive isn't wrapped, isn't planned, isn't even wanted at first. Sometimes it's the quiet realization that you deserve more than half-effort love. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. I didn't know fear until I realized someone I loved could also be someone who wanted to destroy me. Until that moment, I had always trusted my life would follow a predictable path. Work, small routines, friendships, love, chaotic, yes, but navigable. I never imagined that the person closest to me could turn into the architect of my worst nightmares. I'm 24. I just finished my education when I met her. Janice. She was 29, confident in a way that drew people in, soothing in a way that made chaos feel manageable. I fell in love quickly, the way you do with someone who seems to understand the cracks in your life before you even recognize them yourself. I was insecure, often anxious, and she had a calm that made me feel safe. Safe enough to dream, to try, to keep picking myself up no matter how many jobs fell apart around me. I worked a lot of jobs. Cafes, bookstores, libraries, tutoring, grocery stores. Sometimes I held two at once. I did it to gain experience, to grow, to prove to myself that I was capable. Jobs were short, transient, sometimes ending abruptly without explanation. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. I chalked it up to circumstances beyond my control. But the pattern was too precise, too deliberate to ignore forever. The first hints were subtle. A customer complaint that didn't match reality. An anonymous review describing me in ways that weren't true. Occasionally, my former co-workers would call managers with fabricated stories. At the time, I didn't suspect her. I told myself it was just coincidence, or maybe some strange streak of misfortune. She comforted me, supported me, and I clung to that as proof that life had balance. Even when doors slammed in my face, she reminded me there was a path forward. It all changed one ordinary week when I had been working part-time at a bakery for a little over 2 months. I liked the job. It was quiet, steady. My manager treated me well, and the customers were pleasant. I thought things were finally settling, and then a review appeared. At first, I didn't panic. I'd seen them before, but as I read the words, my chest tightened. Someone had written a detailed complaint about a worker matching my description. The day described was one I had worked alone. Every critique, every insult, every negative observation fit me perfectly. My stomach dropped. For a second, the room seemed to tilt, like gravity had betrayed me. I explained to my manager calmly, recounting past instances. She believed me, thankfully, and promised to handle it. Relief washed over me, brief and fragile. I didn't tell Janice. Not yet. I needed a moment to breathe, to process. I thought perhaps I was overreacting. Maybe I was imagining a pattern where none existed. Maybe my anxiety was just flaring. But deep down, I had an uneasy feeling I couldn't shake. 2 days later, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I needed clarity, confirmation. I asked to use her booking account to make a train ticket to see my dad. She handed it over without hesitation. While she showered, I opened her email. I told myself it was normal. I had used accounts before, but my instincts were screaming. Something was off. I found an email she had sent to herself. It contained a spreadsheet. I froze. Opening it felt like stepping into a trap I didn't even know existed. The spreadsheet was meticulous. Each of my jobs was listed. Work schedules, passwords, emails, notes on managers and co-workers. Instructions, strategies, timelines. Everything one could need to sabotage a person's life efficiently. It wasn't messy or impulsive. It was calculated, purposeful. My body went cold. I felt hunted. I couldn't comprehend the scope of what I was seeing. Every job I'd held, every opportunity I'd tried to build, every chance to stabilize myself, all documented and prepared to be destroyed. My hands shook as I scrolled. I took screenshots, I printed pages, I archived evidence. Not because I trusted the law to save me, but because I had to feel control somewhere. When she left for work, I packed. I didn't leave anything that mattered behind. Every document, every personal item that could be used against me, I secured. I told my boss I needed time off. I didn't explain. I couldn't. I drove to my father's house, shaking, crying, terrified of a presence that hadn't physically touched me but had invaded every corner of my life. My father stayed calm, patient, and immediately began organizing the chaos I couldn't even begin to manage. Lawyers, police, therapy, things I never thought I'd need at 24 became essential overnight. My apartment, my accounts, my life, all locked down. I felt the weight of betrayal as a physical force pressing down on my chest. Janice tried to contact me. I didn't answer. Not once. I sent a single message telling her it was over. I didn't want her near me. The truth was brutal. Someone I loved, someone I trusted, had systematically prepared to ruin my life. We didn't take her to court. People might call that leniency, but it was survival. The thought of facing her, answering questions, reliving the betrayal, I couldn't endure it. My lawyers settled things quietly, privately, and for the first time in months, I could breathe. Years have passed. I have a stable job. I live in a new home. I've rebuilt routines, relationships, my own sense of safety. I haven't had a single panic attack in months. I keep my digital presence minimal, private, and guarded. I don't know what she's doing. I don't want to know. The lesson is stark, indelible. Trust is fragile. Love can be terrifying. And the person you think will hold you together can sometimes be the one to unravel everything. But surviving it, reclaiming my life, has taught me something stronger than fear. I am resilient. I am cautious now, yes, but I am not broken. And no spreadsheet, no plan, no betrayal can take that from me. Even when the world feels like it is crumbling, there is a way forward. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's painstaking. But every day I wake up, I remind myself, survival is proof of strength. And that strength is mine alone. I had always dreamed of having a home that felt entirely mine. Not just a space to live, but a place where I could express myself freely, creatively, without rules or judgments. When I finally bought my house, a modest place in a quiet neighborhood, I knew I had found that freedom. There was no homeowners association, no committee dictating what shades we could use or how our gardens should look. It was liberating, the kind of autonomy that made every morning feel like a blank canvas. I had a vision in mind. Soft, playful, and welcoming. I wanted my house to feel like it invited people in, like it reflected joy in the same way a warm smile can. I chose a soft peach color for the walls, with accents of sage blue and muted pink to highlight architectural details. Every choice felt intentional. Every color and shade carefully considered to reflect light, warmth, and personality. My yard was an extension of that vision, wildflowers swaying freely, sunflowers towering proudly, garden flags fluttering in gentle arcs, and a small little free library where neighbors could exchange books. I imagined children running up to pick out a story, a feeling of community threaded through something as simple as a shared book. But, of course, not everyone appreciated my vision. Paul, my neighbor, had lived in the neighborhood for 15 years, long before I moved in. He had an air of permanence about him, a sense that his way of seeing the world was the only correct one. He didn't want wildflowers. He didn't want pink accents. He didn't want creativity, whimsy, or anything that might hint at joy over order. His idea of a house was neutral, beige, and safe. Color, to him, was a challenge, a threat to the monotony he had built around himself. The complaints started immediately. Every time a new brushstroke of color appeared, Paul had an opinion. Every new plant or whimsical decoration earned a glare. He stopped by more frequently than was necessary, often leaning against the fence, arms crossed, frowning as if the world had wronged him personally. I tried to be polite. I smiled. I nodded. I reminded myself that people are entitled to opinions, even when those opinions feel unfair. But over time, the constant judgment began to feel suffocating. My space, my sanctuary, was being invaded, not physically, but mentally, emotionally, by someone who refused to accept difference. One weekend, I decided to paint custom pavers with my niece. She was 15, full of excitement and imagination, and she loved the idea of leaving our mark on the yard. We painted turtles, ladybugs, birds, and other cheerful designs, each stroke a testament to creativity, patience, and joy. I imagined the pathway welcoming anyone who walked by, a small burst of happiness in an ordinary day. But before we had even finished, Paul appeared. He leaned over the fence, arms crossed, his face a mixture of irritation and disbelief. "What are you doing now?" he asked, his tone dripping with disdain. I smiled faintly, hoping to diffuse the tension. "We're painting pavers. My niece and I thought it would be fun." He shook his head, muttering about eyesores and disrespect, as though the entire concept of joy were offensive. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wanted to respond calmly, to assert my boundaries without creating unnecessary conflict. And so I said, "Paul, it's time for you to grow up and get over what I'm doing with my house." The words surprised even me. I hadn't intended to be confrontational, but they felt necessary. I couldn't continue bending to his disapproval. He sputtered, incredulous. He told me I had no right to speak to him that way, that I was being disrespectful. I told him simply, "Go away, get a life." If he had so much energy to complain about a house color or a few painted pavers, perhaps he needed a hobby or a distraction. He stormed off, muttering under his breath, leaving me with my niece, who was quietly giggling at the spectacle. It wasn't the first time I'd defended my choices. It wouldn't be the last. Over time, I came to understand something important. The people who feel compelled to control others are rarely happy themselves. Paul wasn't angry because of me. He was angry because he had convinced himself that joy and color were threats, that someone else's happiness somehow diminished his, and no amount of explanation or politeness would change that. My only option was to be unapologetic, to hold my ground while maintaining my own peace. The days that followed were a mix of minor victories and quiet irritations. I continued decorating, painting, planting. The house became exactly what I wanted it to be: bright, welcoming, alive with energy and creativity. Neighbors who appreciated whimsy stopped by occasionally, leaving small gifts of encouragement or sharing stories of their own gardens. Their smiles reminded me that not everyone measures life by sameness or order. Some people see beauty where others see chaos, and that is enough. Paul continued to grumble. He would shake his head when passing, comment under his breath, and occasionally send long-winded complaints to other neighbors. But I had grown used to it. I had learned that standing up for myself and my home did not make me the antagonist. It made me the steward of my own space, the curator of my own happiness. And nothing anyone else could say or do would change that. Sometimes, at night, I would walk through the yard, barefoot, tracing my hands along the edges of the stone walls I had built around the wheat fields I planted. The stacked stones reminded me of places I had seen in pictures of Scotland and Ireland, the kind of quiet, solid beauty that existed for centuries without apology. I thought about my niece, about our painted pavers, and I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was mine. Entirely mine. Joyful, chaotic, alive, and unapologetic. It wasn't just about colors or pavers. It was about claiming space in the world without fear. About recognizing that boundaries are necessary, that personal expression is not negotiable, and that there are people in life whose opinions, no matter how loudly expressed, do not define you. The house became a lesson in resilience. Each flower, each painted stone, each laugh echoed through the yard as a reminder that joy is not optional and that standing firm in one's values is not selfish. It is survival. And so, every morning, I wake, make coffee, and step onto the porch. The sun falls softly on the painted walls, the wildflowers swaying in the gentle breeze. Children run along the path, stopping to pick a flower or read a book from the little library. The laughter, the light, the simple, unremarkable happiness feels like victory. Not over Paul, not over anyone else, but over the fear of being unseen, unheard, or diminished. I learned, in a quiet and profound way, that the beauty of life is not measured by the absence of opposition. It is measured by the courage to live authentically, unapologetically, and without fear. Paul may never understand. He may never appreciate it. But I do. My home is mine, my joy is mine, and in that, I am entirely free. I had always thought trust was simple. You love someone, you care for them, you communicate, and everything else falls into place. At least, that's what I believed until Lena's birthday party incident forced me to realize that trust is fragile, delicate, and easily shaken, even without betrayal. I'm 29, she's 27, and we had been together for 10 months. It wasn't a long time, not compared to marriages or decade-long relationships, but it was enough time to feel grounded. We had laughed, argued, shared our pasts, and even discussed moving in together the following year. In the day-to-day, things felt effortless. At least, that's how it seemed until one weekend, everything shifted without warning. It started innocuously enough. Lena told me she was going out with some friends from college on a Saturday night. I didn't mind. I had plans to watch a game with my brother. I thought nothing of it. We exchanged casual goodbyes. She left, and the evening went as expected. The next day, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. I scrolled, distractedly, until I saw a story from one of her friends. A photo of a group of people, smiling. In the caption, someone wrote, "Happy birthday, Jason." My heart skipped. I recognized the name immediately. Jason was Lena's ex, someone she had dated for 3 years. They had broken up a little over a year before Lena and I met. From what I knew, they had been serious. From what Lena had said, they were on good terms, friendly, casual, but not close. That was enough to make me pause. I waited until she came home to bring it up. Calmly, I asked, "Were you at Jason's birthday?" She looked surprised, almost as if she hadn't considered that I might notice. Then she said yes, quickly adding that it wasn't a big deal, just a group gathering, and she hadn't thought it mattered. Her words were calm, but the tone felt hollow to me. It wasn't about jealousy. I wasn't accusing her of cheating. It was the omission, the choice not to mention it until I discovered it through social media. That felt deliberate. that felt like something had been hidden. And even though she said she didn't think I would care, the sensation of being left out, of being intentionally sidelined, dug into me. I stayed calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I just expressed that I would have appreciated knowing beforehand. She got defensive, saying I was overreacting, that she hadn't hidden it. But in that moment, I knew what hiding felt like. It was in the absence of transparency, in the unspoken choice to let the truth remain obscured. It was a decision she had made, perhaps small, but impactful. The evening was tense. We didn't fight outright, but the air between us shifted. She said she didn't want to make it a big deal. I nodded, understanding, but my gut told me this was more than just a minor oversight. It wasn't the party. It was how she handled it. How she dismissed my feelings. How she prioritized her comfort over honesty. Over the following days, things didn't improve. Awkward conversations popped up. She insisted I was overthinking. I tried to let it go, but the feeling of unease lingered, persistent. Every interaction carried a subtle tension, a reminder that we might not align in our expectations of trust and communication. 10 days later, I realized something critical. Lena hadn't lied in the traditional sense, but the intent to obscure the truth was there. She admitted she hadn't told me about the party because she knew how I would react. That confirmation struck me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about secrecy, it was about the fundamental difference in how we approached honesty in a relationship. She felt the need to manipulate the situation to avoid conflict. I felt the need to be treated as an equal partner, deserving of transparency. We didn't argue. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches. Instead, there was a quiet, mutual understanding that forcing the relationship forward would only create more harm. We separated not with anger, but with the recognition that our values did not align. Looking back, I realized this wasn't a failure of affection. Lena and I cared for each other deeply, but love alone is not enough. Trust and communication are the frameworks that allow love to endure. Without them, even the best intentions can crumble under the weight of withheld truths. The experience left a mark, yes, but it also taught me something invaluable. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of misalignment, to honor my instincts, and to understand that uneasy feelings in a relationship are not to be dismissed lightly. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for yourself, and for someone you care about, is to step away before the erosion becomes irreparable. It was unfortunate. It hurt. But I walked away knowing I had respected myself, honored my feelings, and refused to compromise my boundaries for comfort. That awareness became a foundation for how I approached all future relationships, a reminder that transparency and honesty are not optional. They are essential. And that is a lesson worth every ache, every sleepless night, and every moment of quiet reflection.